Greetings. This recording is done earlier than most because I do have a Friday night Bible study. Those of you who are hearing this around the time it's being recorded, I do have a Friday night Bible study coming up. What would the date? Okay, the date of that would be May 19th of 2023, and that would be, I believe it would be 9 o'clock Eastern time. 9 o'clock Eastern time. But it's the group I'm speaking to are based in Hartford, Wisconsin, the Congregational Fellowship of God. So if you check them out, you'll get the information on the Bible study. And if I don't, flub it up, I suppose they'll record it. So maybe even if you hear this talk months and years from now, you'll still be able to check out that Bible study by going to the Congregational Fellowship of God website. Years ago, when I was in the yeshiva, I went by my Hebrew name Meir, and so people called, so my friends called me Meir. And one of my friends from the yeshiva, I was in Brooklyn at the time, and one of my friends I called, and a younger brother, a little sister answered the phone. So I said, "This is Mayor Kaplan calling." So the little child got all excited and went, I guess ran or went to his or her older brother and said, "Wow, Mayor Kaplan's on the phone." But it was no big deal, right? The mayor of New York at that time, I believe, was John Lindsay, as I recall. But sometimes I would go by my two names, Mayor David. My name is Mark David in English, and named after the David part was named after an uncle who died before I was born. David is a very popular name, of course, in the Jewish community, and I see that it's popular also in the UK. But in any case, I'm going to talk today about a very important promise relating to David. We are approaching the Pentecost season. The day before, I'm speaking now in the evening, so it's technically, from a biblical point of view, the 6th day of the week, preparation day for the Sabbath, and the 41st day counting towards Pentecost. So Thursday was Ascension Day, the 40th day towards Pentecost. Some churches keep it as a holiday, but it also was a special day over in Israel, because the day I'm speaking now is the 28th day of the second month, and that is Yom Yerushalayim. That's the day back in 1967 when, after 19 years of being barred from being there, the Jews re-entered the eastern Jerusalem, the older part, and they, in effect, reunited the city. And so from this point on, the capital of Israel, Jerusalem, was now extended to the eastern part. And so they, and at that time, shortly afterwards, that happened in June of 1967, but on the Jewish calendar, 28th ER, which this year comes out on May 20th, I guess it would be, right? Tomorrow's the 20th, from a secular point of view. All right. So no. Anyway,
not the 20th.
No. What is no?
19th.
No, tomorrow's the 19th. That's better. 19th. But anyway, back then it came out in early June. But anyway, the point I was going to make is that about a month later, July 4th, I was at a wedding, and of course we were still in a synagogue. And we were still in the afterglow of the 6-day war, and so I was, of course, in an ultra-Orthodox yeshiva at the time, and in the synagogue there was an older man, and he said to me, "I think there's going to be another holiday." So I listened respectfully and didn't answer, but in my mind I thought, nah, there's not going to be another holiday. But he was right, and I was wrong, because now there is, in fact, Jerusalem Day, and it's celebrated at least a lot in the land of Israel and here and there around the world. And so it focuses our attention on that city, if we think about it, where so much history has taken place and so much prophecy will be taking place. And of course, Pentecost came to Jerusalem at the beginning of the history of the New Testament church. It begins on Pentecost there, on the Temple Mount. And on Pentecost, the Jewish tradition is that David died on Pentecost. And in Acts 2 and verse 29, Peter may be associating with that tradition as he speaks of David as a prophet. Of course, David, many of his experiences prefigured Jesus' experiences, and many things he said were prophecies, of course, of Jesus Christ, who, humanly speaking, was his descendant. And in Acts 2:29, referring to some of these prophecies that he quotes, which you can read earlier, I'm going to read in verse 29. Men and brethren, let me speak freely to you of the patriarch David, that he is both dead and buried, and his tomb is with us to this day. But then he talks about the fact that David was prophesying about his descendant, Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ, the Messiah, needed to be biblically a descendant of David. The Messiah must be a descendant of David. There is a covenant God made with David, that the king, the great king, would come from David. And in Revelation 5, I'll just give you one example here as we come to the end of the Bible. In Revelation 5 and verse 5, heavenly beings are speaking to John. But one of the elders said to me, do not weep. Behold, a lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has prevailed to open the scroll and to loose its 7 seals. So it's important for credibility, for the credibility of the Bible, credibility of Jesus Christ, that he be humanly a descendant of David. God did make a covenant with David. Now, if you go back to the history of the Bible, of the covenants, and it's important. At this time of year, it's good to think about covenants, because the festival of weeks, or Pentecost, the festival of the 50th day, is called Shavuot in Deuteronomy 16:16. It's the feast of Chag HaShavuot, the feast of weeks. We have 7 weeks, and the 50th day is Pentecost. But the word Shavua is similar to the Shavua, meaning an oath. So the festival of Pentecost is also the festival of oaths, or the festival of covenants. And I believe that historically the Sinaitic covenant was ratified on Pentecost, and of course we have the new covenant coming in a formal sense in Jerusalem on Pentecost, around whenever it was. I'll say AD 33 as a working date. I'm not staking my life on it. But the year of the beginning formally of the New Testament church in the new covenant comes on Pentecost. So Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, is also the feast of covenants. There's an intertestamental book. Of course, it's not in the Bible, but there's a religious work called the Book of Jubilees that I think makes that point. So as we speak of covenants, and last week I gave a talk on the New Covenant, and I appreciate the response there. If you haven't checked it out, check it out. I did give a talk last week on the New Covenant, which is really the solution to all of humanity's ills. Ultimately, is having a right relationship to God through Jesus Christ. Once the human race as a whole is in that situation, we're going to have a Garden of Eden here rather than what we have at present. So I talked about covenants, and really, when we think of covenants, let's associate covenants with people. We have and I'm not going to go through them all today, but we have the covenant with Adam, the covenant with Noah, the covenant with Abraham, the covenant, through Moses, to the children of Israel through Moses. Then there's a covenant with Levi, with Aaron, with Phineas, and there's a covenant with David. And then there's the new covenant, and the new covenant through Jesus Christ. But the new covenant, of course, is based on the Abrahamic covenant, and of course also it includes the Davidic covenant. It really absorbs all of these one way or the other. And I want to talk today about the covenant that God made with David, which is a part of the new covenant, because the new covenant is made through Jesus Christ, who yes, God became human in order to become our sacrifice, our Savior. But he had to be a particular kind of human. He had to be Jewish. He had to be a descendant of David. And in Isaiah 55, I was talking about my experience in the yeshiva world earlier. When I remember on some of the important fast days, we would conclude the fast day by reciting Isaiah 55. I want to go there and read a promise that God makes in Isaiah 55. In the third verse of Isaiah 55, incline your ear and come to me. Hear, and your soul shall live. And I will make an everlasting covenant with you, the sure mercies of David. Oh, the sure mercies of David. That's what I want to talk about today. The new covenant represents the sure mercies of David. It's a promise that God carries through the family of David. The sure mercies of David. Much of the Old Testament was written either by David or about David. A few years ago, the Church of God Seventh Day did a very nice booklet. They have these adult Bible study booklets. And they did a very nice booklet giving a series of Bible studies on the life of David. They're based in Denver, Colorado. It may still be possible to obtain that booklet. And the point I wanted to bring out today is that there are prophetic implications, of course, to world events. And recently we had the coronation of Charles III as King of the United Kingdom. And he is actually the head of state, I think, for about 15 countries. He's also, I think, a figure that represents some importance to the entire Commonwealth Association. He's a kind of, in a sense, an extra ambassador for the UK, a kind of PR man or connecting person between the UK and many of the countries with whom they have with which they have special dealings, and particularly he would be honored by those countries that still consider him in a certain sense the head of state. So theoretically, there's a council general, I think they call it, that represents him in these different countries, and he is in effect a symbol of the nation. He doesn't administer he's not an executive like a prime minister, or in some countries maybe a president, but he's a head of state. He represents the nation. He's above politics, and he symbolizes the history and traditions and culture of the nations, and he in a sense is looked upon as one who because of his stature can have some influence for the good, for the benefit of those nations. He and his queen consort Camilla. But today I'm going to share a belief that I have, that many thousands of people have, and obviously most of the world doesn't share this belief, but there are thousands who do. And obviously, if I were pastoring a local congregation, I have a kind of we do meet here for flair, and we send out a service. And I hope many of you will be virtually attending the Flair services over the years. But we don't really have a particularly large group of people here at this point. God willing, we will, but not right now. We don't. But the point I'm bringing out is, if I were pastoring a congregation, and you were in that congregation and didn't agree with me on this point, it wouldn't be a problem. You would still be a member in good standing. And in fact, I would be willing even to ordain you into the ministry if you disagree with me on this point. But I do believe it's something worth looking into. It's something I believe. And that is, to be frank about it, I do believe that the British monarchy, King Charles III was just coronated King of the United Kingdom and head of state of these various Commonwealth countries. I do believe that the monarchy over the British Isles, that the king does descend from David, that it is a Davidic monarchy, and therefore it does fulfill certain prophecies in the Bible, and it's therefore quite significant biblically. It's quite significant biblically. If you saw the coronation or read about it, you know how much biblical influence is on that ceremony. King Charles III was anointed with holy oil, consecrated oil from the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. And at the coronation, they sing a song about Zadok the priest. I have a grandson, Simon Zadok, and Zadok, of course, was one of David's high priests, and he was the one that stayed faithful and was there for the coronation of Solomon. And they sing a song, they sing a hymn about Zadok the priest at British coronations, and so probably some of you heard it. Now, I don't have time today to get into all of the ins and outs of the history of it, but I want to make some comments about it, because I do believe that the British throne, although it may be beleaguered, have its ups and downs, I do believe it will survive in some form. And when Jesus Christ returns, he will in effect be able to inherit that throne. That throne is there for him to finally inherit. It may be that by the time he comes, the person occupying that throne will be perhaps in captivity somewhere. I hate to say that, but based on Bible prophecy, either in captivity or perhaps in refuge, a refugee somewhere, hiding out. Whoever that may be, whoever that man or woman may be, will either possibly be a captive or a refugee. But there will be a throne for Jesus Christ to inherit. As I said, I can't go into all of that today, but I wanted to put that out there and share that with you, and I want to at least cover some of the background of that today. I want to go to Genesis 49 and verse 10. Genesis 49 and verse 10. A prophecy about Judah. Well, I see what I did. I went back too far. All right. Genesis 49 and verse 10. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him will be the obedience of the people. Shiloh could be translated he whose it is, or he whose right it is. It's a special title given to the one who's going to be the king. So the promise to Judah is that promise persists until the person comes who will fulfill that promise. Now, it's interesting. Years ago, I heard somebody say something quite interesting. That at the time of Jesus Christ, there were genealogical records. Jesus Christ could prove his descent back then, but if some Messiah would come now, some would-be Messiah, how would we really know, that he's a descendant of David? Maimonides talks about, the great rabbi, philosopher, and physician Maimonides from the Middle Ages talks about what the Messiah will do. So, in other words, the Jews will have to wait and see what he does, if he really fulfills what the Messiah is supposed to do, and then they would know. But it is interesting. At the time of Christ could have proven his genealogy, as far as I understand, but a person can't do that now. But in any case, we know that the Messiah will be a descendant of David. Yes, he comes from Judah, but he comes particularly from the Davidic branch of Judah. Now, I want to go to Isaiah 11. Isaiah 11. And you know how that starts, how that prophecy begins. There shall come forth a rod from the stem of Jesse. You see, Jesse was the father of David, David ben Yishai. There shall come forth a rod from the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall come out of his roots. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord. Now we understand as Christians that the Messiah is both Davidic and divine, and of course that's something that Jews and Muslims at this point cannot accept. Or, let's say practicers of Judaism and those who are Muslim from a theological point of view. Islam and Judaism do not agree with that. But if we read the Old Testament, you can certainly see why we would contend that the Old Testament does prophesy that the Messiah is both Davidic and divine. Now, before his arrest and crucifixion, Jesus Christ stumped the religious leaders of his day by quoting from Psalm 110. They didn't really have a good answer for him. This is Psalm 110. It says, a Psalm of David. The Lord said to my Lord, Yahweh, the Eternal, Hashem, Adonai, said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. So he said, well, if the Messiah is the son of David, how is he David's Lord? Well, we understand. They didn't, but we can understand that he was both the descendant of David, but also his Lord, because of the great miracle of the incarnation. Now if you go to the announcement of the birth of Christ. Now he wasn't born then, but Mary was told, this is the incarnation time. In Luke 1 and verse 32. Luke 1 and verse 32. He shall be great and will be called the Son of the Highest, and the Lord God will give him the throne of his father David. He will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there shall be no end. And we understand the kingdom is over Israel, but ultimately it's over the whole world. If you put all of the scriptures together, he is King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and I'll have more to say about that as we go along. But let's understand that there were promises given to Jacob, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and those promises were fulfilled historically, and they should not be ignored. And if you don't agree with what I'm about to say, then you'll need to give me an effective alternative to what I'm about to say. What I'm about to say is that the Israelite kingdom had a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom, and we understand the northern kingdom was taken into captivity and never returned. So we do have the traditional 10 lost tribes. And if you believe in the Bible, you're not going to ignore that reality. And yet the 12 tribes of Israel are very important in the Bible. We have Genesis 49. We have Deuteronomy 33. We have Revelation 7. We have, Revelation, I believe the 21st chapter brings them up again at the end of the Bible. And the 12 tribes of Israel figure all the way through the Bible. And there are many prophecies made regarding that relate particularly, it would seem, not so much to the Jewish people, but as to the rest of Israel, the descendants of the northern kingdom, the so-called lost tribes. Now, what happened to them? Did they totally assimilate? Huge numbers of them were deported. Now, if you look at what happened in America under President Jackson, Indian tribes were relocated, and they were relocated to Indian territory, and then as they were functioning as tribes there. They didn't disappear. And the 12 tribes, the 10 lost tribes, didn't disappear either. They migrated as tribes. They were taken, of course, forcibly removed to what is today Iraq and Iran, but they then moved north into what would be the area loosely the Russian regions, the old USSR area, and then they migrated into Europe, and finally wind up in the Northwest Europe. The democratic republics of Northwest Europe, I believe, are descendants of those tribes, and of course some of them then extended on into North America and Australia, New Zealand, and so on. And I believe if you look at the prophecies about what would happen to those tribes, then you would understand that you would at least be willing to give it a hearing. I understand that at this point many believe it, but most don't. But I want to bring that out. And I want to first read Genesis 12:3. And I will bless those who bless you, God says to Abraham, and I will curse him who curses you, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So through Abraham, all the families of the earth will be blessed. And of course that applies particularly to Jesus Christ, the Messiah, spiritually speaking. But Abraham's descendants would also be a physical blessing to the world. They would be nations that would have great abundance and would share that with other nations if you read a lot of these prophecies. You could look at, for example, Genesis 48 and the importance of Joseph's sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And in Genesis 35, God says to Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, also God said to him, I am God Almighty, be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall proceed from you. A nation and a company of nations. And this involves the birthright that Abraham and Isaac and Jacob had, which involved physical blessings. You read what Isaac says to Jacob about all the physical benefits he would have. And it says that a nation and a company of nations would proceed from him. And if you look at history, and if you look at the last few hundred years of history, you could, as candidates for this prophecy, think about the British Commonwealth, UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and of course the US, a nation and a company of nations. And then kings shall come from your body. Well, not Judah was the tribe that would have the kings. So Judah doesn't necessarily become some great world empire, some great huge country, but the Jewish people have a very important role to play, and descendants of Judah have become royalty. Now I realize I'm just giving you an intro to this concept, the tip of the iceberg, and I see that I'm going to have to actually make this into a series of talks. Excuse me. So what's going to happen today then, I guess, this will be the intro where I maybe stir up the pot a little bit, and you're saying, what's he saying? And maybe it'll cause you to dig into some of these scriptures. You should take a look at Genesis 49, and take a look at Deuteronomy 33, and then you should take a look at Genesis 48. Look at these prophecies that are made regarding the children of Jacob, and think about the history of recent centuries. I want to go to way back to Genesis 24, where Rebekah is going to marry Isaac, and the prophecy that is said of Rebekah. I'm going to go to verse 60. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, our sister, may you become the mother of thousands and 10,000s, and may your descendants possess the gates of those who hate them. Abraham's descendants were to be as the dust of the ground, as the stars of the sky. And, here, Rebekah is to be the mother of thousands and 10,000s, and may her descendants possess the gates of those who hate them. Think about, look at a world map from 100 years ago. And all of the great land and sea gates in the world are controlled by the English-speaking nations. The British Empire and the United States, Panama Canal, Suez Canal, Gibraltar. I could go on and on. Take a look at a map from 100 years ago and think of important land and sea gates in the world and who controlled them at that time. So, as I said, I could go on and on, but I'm giving you a little bit of background that I do believe that the nations of Northwest Europe were descendants of the lost tribes of Israel, and particularly that the descendants of Ephraim are the backbone of the British people. Not everybody, but the dominant element in Britain, in England, were the descendants of Ephraim. But there were differences in England. There were cultural differences. In fact, there were several civil wars in England. There was the War of the Roses, Lancaster versus York. and then there was the Puritan Cavalier Civil War. And the Civil Wars ended in England once the colonists, once the Americans, the Proto-Americans, those who became Americans, once they left. The Civil Wars in England ended, and so we Americans had our own Civil War here. So I believe that there were certain parts of England, if you study the migration patterns, that emptied out, that contributed more to the settlement of America than certain other regions of England. And what was happening is that two distinct groups were separating. They were closely related, but they were separating. And this was the separation of Manasseh from Ephraim. So we have the dominant stock in America that formed America comes from Manasseh, whereas the peoples in Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand come from Ephraim. And I realize there's a lot that I would have to do to back this up, but I'm introducing the subject now. And the other tribes of Israel can be found, as I said, among the descendants. Their descendants can be found in those northwest European nations. And, of course, the Jews have retained their identity as Israelites. The dominant tribe there was Judah, but there was a mixture there. There was Benjamin and Simeon, and then a lot of Levi, my tribe. The tribe of Levi, of course, was there. And there was a covenant made, of course, with Abraham, and a covenant made with the people of Israel at Sinai. And then there's, of course, a new covenant made with, really, ultimately with all of humanity, but first with Israel and Judah. And that covenant is based on a commitment that was made to David. And I want to just mention today a couple of points. I would say that at the time that Judah was destroyed by the Babylonians, by the Chaldean Empire, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, around 587 BC, at that time, when Judah was destroyed, there already were some elements of the lost tribes that had come to the British Isles, and some had settled in Ireland. Ireland eventually, the southern part particularly, became home to the tribe of Dan. The tribe of Dan was originally on the coast of Israel, where Tel Aviv is today, and many of them were traveling around the Mediterranean Sea, and some continued westward, and then others fled when the Assyrians invaded. Some of them were located in what is today the Golan Heights, and some were taken captive, but others would have fled. But in any case, by the time that the Jerusalem fell, there were already Israelites in the British Isles, and as I said, Ireland was becoming home to the tribe of Dan. And in southern Ireland, there were descendants of Judah who had a certain status as rulers. They were in Spain originally, and then wound up moving to Ireland. And around the time that they migrated from Spain to Ireland was around the time that Judah fell. And when they began ruling in Ireland, what happened was that a descendant of David from Judah was taken to Ireland, married into the royal line there. So actually we had rulers in Ireland who were descendants of David through a woman that married a king. She became in effect queen, and they married, and so a descendant of David became a king over Ireland. Later on, that throne moved to Scotland, and then down to England, and James VI of Scotland became James I of England, and I believe it was his grandson that for a while was in Germany. He had a grandson living in Germany, and or great grandson, and that grandson or great grandson was the closest relative, who was a Protestant, because the British wanted a Protestant ruler. He was the closest relative of Queen Anne. When she died, I believe is how the succession goes, then he was brought over from the family of Hanover, and so now you had that family still ruling, that dynasty that went from Ireland to Scotland to England. As I said, there was a relative ruling in Germany who was brought in, And later on, I think around the time of the First World War, they changed the name from Hanover to Windsor. And so that's the dynasty that's still ruling now. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of evidence of what I'm talking about, and then I'll have to make a series out of this. I hadn't planned to, but I see there's so much information, and I realize it's also something that maybe for some of you is something you maybe have never been exposed to before. So I really do need to give it at least another session or two, because it's important enough for me to share this information with you, even if you may not agree, but at least I've put it out there, and you can research it. There's material out there, certain organizations, and I'm not talking about racists and bigots, and I'm talking about students of the Bible. A lot of people twist certain doctrines, and this doctrine has been twisted and perverted and used by racists and bigots, and that's not obviously what I'm dealing with. I'm dealing with people who are sincere students of the Bible and of Bible prophecy. But I do want to go to Jeremiah, the 43rd chapter and the 6th verse. When Judah fell, the king was murdered and all of his offspring, but his daughters survived. And so in Jeremiah 43 and verse 6, we see that a remnant escaped from the land of Israel down into Egypt, and Jeremiah was there. I'm in 43:6. Men, women, children, the king's daughters, and every person whom Nebuchadnezzar, the captain of the guard, had left with Gedaliah the son of Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, and Jeremiah the prophet, and Baruch the son of Neriah. Baruch was his scribe. And so we have the king's daughters. Notice that in Jeremiah 43:6, the king's daughters survived. And so there's reason to believe, and I can go into it, as I said, in my second presentation. There's reason to believe that Jeremiah the prophet survived and took at least a daughter of Zedekiah to marry into the royal line that was ruling, eventually was ruling in Ireland. She married into that line, and so we had a descendant of David marrying a descendant of Judah, not of David, but at least a descendant of Judah, marrying into that line, and then from there came kings that ultimately wound up as descendants of the present British monarchy. So the British monarchy is really fulfilling the promise that God gave to David, that he would never lack somebody to rule over Israel, because I believe that Charles is ruling over Israelitish people. That's not all he's ruling over, and of course I realize his reign is not what it once was. He's a constitutional monarch, but he's still there, and the throne is therefore in that sense still there. And that throne ultimately is the one I believe Jesus Christ will inherit, and once he inherits it, he's going to be ruling the entire world. The British Empire at its height ruled about a quarter of the world. Amazing. Well, Jesus Christ will eventually rule all of the world. I want to go to Jeremiah 33 and verse 17. For thus says the Lord, David shall never lack a man to sit on the throne of the house of Israel. So he said that there would always be an heir around. So you could take it that way. But if you want to read it very closely, maybe what he's saying is that in fact, somewhere there will be Israelitish people, and there will be a descendant of David ruling over them through history. And that, I believe, is what has happened. I do believe that is what has happened. That there are people descended from those lost tribes, and over them is ruling a monarch who actually is a descendant of David. So I realize I've just kind of skimmed the surface. So maybe you'll want to come back and hear more about this. Like if we go back to Acts 17, remember that people were really rattled when Paul talked about the resurrection. It was something that Greeks didn't really relate to. The scholars in Athens, the philosophers, really weren't that excited about the resurrection. But let's go to verse 32 of Acts 17. And when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, while others said, "We will hear you again on this matter." Now maybe that's the reaction I'm getting right now. Maybe some of you right now are, mentally mocking, and others of you are saying, we will hear again. We will hear you again on this matter. So God willing, you will. And I'm sorry I tried to bite off more than I could chew, I suppose. But as I said, I'm glad I introduced this subject because it's relevant to an understanding of history and prophecy, and it is something that I wanted to share with those of you who view my messages. So I hope at least some of you, of course, have a lot of background in this area, and so in that sense I'm preaching to the choir. A lot of you do understand a lot of this, so hopefully I've reinforced your conviction on this. But for the rest, keep listening and keep studying and praying. And I do want to go to a final prophecy, or a couple of prophecies in conclusion, as I said, and I will pursue this matter again. But I'm calling this talk The Sure Mercies of David, and I guess I'll call it Part 1. The Sure Mercies of David, Part 1. So let me go to Revelation 11 and verse 15. As I said, I do believe that the throne that Charles now occupies will be occupied by somebody, somewhere, when Jesus Christ returns. As I said, the unfortunate reality is that person may either be in captivity or a refugee somewhere. And that male or female will then, have the opportunity to surrender that crown to another descendant of David, whose right it is. He's the Shiloh. He's the one whose right it is. He is the one who fulfills God's covenant with David, and he will inherit that throne, and he will, of course, first rule over the people of Israel in the promised land, and then from there, eventually, though, it will expand to the whole world, his kingdom. And in Revelation 11, verse 15, we read, well, all of you know it by heart. A lot of you are probably already saying it or even singing it. Okay. Then the seventh angel sounded, and there were loud voices in heaven saying, "The kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever." And so what is happening there? We go back to Isaiah 55. What is happening there? A promise is being fulfilled, of course. Many promises are being fulfilled. But this one I want to focus on as we think about recent events in the United Kingdom. Isaiah 55 and verse 3. God says through Isaiah, "Incline your ear and come to me. Hear, and your soul shall live. And I will make an everlasting covenant with you, the sure mercies of David." So, God willing, I'll have more to say on this matter the week before Pentecost. All the best to you and yours.